it's a really interesting headspace to feel that I'm lucky, but yet I'm going through the fucking worst thing in the world at the same time is quite conflicting and it's challenging. So it's kind of playing with my head a little bit, and I can't get out, I can't work, which is so, we sort of sat at home for 5 months waiting to get back to work, and I simply can't.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Humans are pretty amazing. When faced with adversity, even when the chips seem stacked against us, something from within finds a way to navigate the situation and find a way forward. This series has been a testament to not only the talents and diversity of our food industry, but to the power of human spirit. Life, as we've come to realise, can change in a heartbeat. And it's this realisation that's changing the way we view the world and our place in it. Gabrielle Webster is the head sommelier of Icebergs Dining Room, Bondi. Gabrielle, how are you?
I'm really well, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad that we're catching up, because I know you've got quite a story to share. Everyone's had quite a big year and quite a difficult year, and you've had added challenges to that. How are things at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, 2020 is really going to go down in history, I think, for not just us in the industry, but for everyone. For me personally, it's just been out of control. There was obviously COVID, and I had managed to actually get back to Icebergs for 3 weeks, and then we were in a head-on collision. I airlifted to hospital, and I almost died of some pretty incredible injuries, of which I'm still dealing with. So it's been sort of one thing on top of the on top of the other. Has been this year is quite like nothing I've ever experienced.
Well, we can touch on some of those horrific circumstances you found yourself in a little bit later. Do you want to take us back to earlier on in the year? The industry was still coming to grips with the impact of the bushfires and what that meant for tourism and restaurants.
Yeah, and look, that was huge for us, because I love, Morris always uses this sort of saying that you would go to Rockpool to make the deal and you would come to Icebergs to celebrate. And so for
Wow.
summer, it's a good one, isn't it? I really like it. And it's actually very, very true. And for summer for us it's a big deal, and we're busy, and not only are we busy with Christmas parties and people from Australia, we're a huge tourist destination. And so with the bushfires and what obviously what our farmers and people sort of not living in Bondi went through, for us it was really quite overwhelming, because you couldn't go outside, and the world was told via the media that we were burning, and so people weren't coming, and so we didn't. It's kind of a little bit of a sort of a thing, the American tourists come in January and the Chinese tourists come in December, and it sort of happens like clockwork there, and we just didn't have them this year, and being a venue with such an outlook like Icebergs has, I mean, I think it's one of the most beautiful dining rooms in the world. When it's covered in smoke and ashes falling on the white tablecloths, and it was just absolutely overwhelming. It was horrific, and because we're, in our industry, we're all very connected to the suppliers and the people that we get our products from, and so to understand, that the Adelaide Hills burnt down was just it's horrific is basically the only word I really have for it. It was a very sort of hard summer to be uplifting for our guests, and when you can't actually physically see North Bondi, it was like sort of nothing. It's hard now to really even sort of remember that, because this year has been so overwhelming with obviously COVID and other problems. But to think back to January, where we were scared of for friends and family, and our country was on fire. to think that that was how we sort of kicked off our year now kind of makes sense, because it's just like we're in hell. But yeah, it was just a lot.
Well, as you say, Icebergs is a place to go and celebrate, and not just for locals, for tourists as well, because it's in such an iconic location as well.
It is, and that Instagram photo is pretty important. If you come to, to Sydney, you need to make sure you've got your head at Berg, so you can. Anyway, that's a thing.
What was the impact like when the pandemic happened for a restaurant that's, it's tourism and sort of.
Look, for us, it was pretty insane because we were, obviously our tourism had stopped, so we weren't quiet because it's always sort of a busy business, but we saw the changes, and then with the shutdown, for us it was quite different because our group at the time, we had a number of different venues that we were a part of, and the Bucket List was one of our venues, and they, through no one's fault, had a big party, I think, on the Sunday before it all sort of really happened, and there was some pretty big COVID cases that came from that. So the Sunday before, I think it was the 23rd of March, or God, I'll never forget that day. But we had a big meeting. We closed because of what had happened at the Bucket List, and every venue within our group closed for the health of obviously our staff and customers, and just to really do the right thing before we were forced to, because of this sort of possible issue. And so the whole group and everyone that worked in it was put into 14 days of self-quarantine at the start. So, which was, and obviously sort of the next day, the whole of Sydney and New South Wales got shut down. Venues got shut down anyway, but it was hard for everyone within the Icebergs group, because not only were we didn't know what was happening and we were shut down, but we were in actual physical self-isolation for those sort of 14 days, which was, it was quite, I feel like it was sort of harder for us than just being shut down, because we couldn't get together with our workmates or teammates or our friends or our family. We had to, obviously we all wanted to do the right thing, so we were we were in sort of isolation, which was pretty crazy. And then for me, in those 14 days, someone pretending to be a member of ISIS hacked all of my social media. So I sort of had lost, we'd lost my job and friends and family, and then my social media, which I didn't realize I thought was so important until that was then taken away as well. So it was that sort of first 14 days was pretty intense and emotional and hard, because our industry and all of us, we're all such social people. I need to be around, and we are humans, and our team we're so close with each other that it was hard not to be with them through that first sort of initial bit.
Dining at Icebergs is one of the most special experiences in Australia, and if not
Thanks.
the planet.
Yeah, I agree.
How do you replicate that sort of situation? What to deal with a closure and pandemic? Was there anything the group did to get money coming in?
It was really tricky, because obviously we were in sort of quarantine over that first sort of 14 days, and we did keep in touch, but we were really set up behind the eight ball of putting together a sort of a takeaway or a delivery thing. And then whilst this was actually also happening, which was one extra thing, Knott's Avenue was being renovated, and so you couldn't actually drive down that tiny little street to get to Icebergs itself. So we couldn't do a delivery or a takeaway or put some packs together with any sort of ease. It really, for us, it really felt like the odds were kind of stacked against us, and we managed to kind of, we filtered a lot to our other venue, Chichabella, and Chichabella, they were remarkable. Dave Owen, who's the general manager there, really stepped up, and Rachel Duffy, they did some amazing things. So we kind of sort of focused on that part of the business. So we did some takeaway and the like through there. But Icebergs itself really kind of got shut down, and the venue itself, sitting on a on a cliff on the ocean, it gets beaten, and it was definitely in need of some love and a little bit of a refurb, and we wanted to sort of pretty it up, and so that was kind of something that Morris and the director sort of took the time to actually do, which was pretty incredible, because you couldn't, even if we wanted to, you simply couldn't get down that street. So it was, I think, harder. I don't know if, yeah, it was harder for our team than it kind of should have been, because we just really had no other option, So we tried to do some little events at Chichabella, and some Mother's Day things, which was incredible. What Alex Pritchard put together for Mother's Day was wild, and Nick Wong stepping in to help out was just incredible. So we sort of did what we could, but it was hard. It was really, the odds were stacked against. I feel though the odds were stacked against us a little bit in that sort of initial period of what the hell do we do? How do we get an income? How do we retain our staff? We have this incredible team of people who are not local Australian citizens. Where that was the kitchen. I mean, Alex, the poor thing, he went from having a team of, I think it was like 46 to like 10 people. Yeah, and that's the other side of all of this, with the Prime Minister telling everyone to go home, which I'm not trying to be political. We lost a huge part of our workforce, and so there was, it was the start of COVID, and COVID itself, obviously, as a business for us at Icebergs, was incredibly tricky to sort of navigate from the beginning. It wasn't easy, and I think there's a lot of people within that group, within that management team, that just deserve a damn pat on the back, because how they sort of stepped sideways and thought outside of the box. Like Simone Ramsey, the events manager, just did some incredible work throughout that time, just trying to think differently, to think like you've never ever had to think before in this industry, it's been a trying time for them, unfortunately, but it's back now. It's quite amazing that we are where we are right now, so which is positive.
At the top of the show, you mentioned there was a 3-week period where you got back to work. What was that period of time like?
Oh God, it was good. It was so good just to be back doing what we all love, and having that sense of normality again, and the thing that, I'm a incredibly social person, and I love what I do. I'm so lucky to have found something that that I work I fucking love, Anthony. And so to be back for those 3 weeks, to have guests coming through the door, it was incredible. I mean, we went very, very hard on being COVID safe. It was Tazo at the front door with a temperature gun. We were all wearing masks, which was, I mean, it's just hard to be in service with a mask on. It obviously, you want to do the right thing, but it's hard to talk to people. It's hard to get people's attention. It's hard, it's hot and uncomfortable, and I mean, this is the world that we're in right now. So I'm not anti-mask or anything, but we tried so hard to go over and above being COVID safe, that everyone felt comfortable and the staff felt comfortable, and I think setting that in place really kind of made those 3 weeks for me really quite excellent. And I think from a customer point of view, they felt very safe. So they kept coming back in droves, which was really quite excellent, in all honesty. It was really great.
You mentioned after those 3 weeks that you were involved in a pretty horrific head-on car accident.
Yeah, it was my brother-in-law. So my husband, Aaron, who's a pastry chef at Manta, and his brother, Ben Eady, who was one of Sydney's greatest waiters, and he'll probably hate me for saying this, but he was at Est for forever, but he's now a lawyer. And I got home from work quite late on a Saturday night, and Ari was explaining about how he had this ridiculous amount of driving to do. So he had a court case in Tamworth that Monday morning. And I just thought, well, why don't we go? Why don't we just sit in the car? Because I was worried about him having an accident. Oh my goodness. And so I thought, we would go and we would share the drive and just be there for support, and he wouldn't be on his own. And so, we left here on a Sunday afternoon, and it was great to be on a road trip. It was really fun. We were in the car, we were playing music, and we stopped at Muswellbrook and had some dinner in a really shitty pub, and it was just awesome. And we were I think maybe half an hour away from Tamworth. It was about 8:30 at night, and we were just driving on that freeway. I think it's called the New England Freeway, and another guy who had a bull bar on his car, he was actually moving house, the poor thing, just veered into our lane, and at no brakes, 100 k's an hour, we had a head-on collision.
Wow.
If he hit us, there's a lot. Ari took lots of photos because my husband was away. I was knocked unconscious, as was Ben, who was driving, and Ari, the poor thing was conscious throughout the whole thing, and he had to pull me out of the car because he thought that the car he could smell gas, so he got me out, and I suffered. I was in the back seat, and I really suffered sort of the worst injuries of the three of us. I had I don't know if my head went through the window or if glass just broke on my head, but I've got some pretty intense facial scarring from that now, just underneath my eye, all the way down through my mouth and to my chin. Was ripped right open, and I had a punctured lung and a collapsed lung and internal bleeding, and so I had 7 broken ribs, which, just on a side note, is the most painful thing in the world because laughing and crying is so not an option when you've got a broken rib plus 7. But yeah, so he pulled me out, and then the next person that drove past was amazingly a nurse. So he sort of checked all our vitals, and we were fine. He called the ambulance, who then called the helicopter, and we got airlifted. Ben and I got airlifted to John Hunter Hospital, where it was pretty touch and go for a while there. I mean, I look back now and laugh, but it wasn't a thing. But I was coughing apparently because I had so much blood in my lungs. So I was coughing on arrival, and they actually put me in a COVID ward for 24 hours before they would do any work on me, which was, I mean, at the time was absolutely horrific. But looking back, I think it's pretty funny. So, so I was sort of in there, and then, we've had sort of surgeries and the like. And Ben suffered some pretty intense breaks and injuries. Ari came out relatively okay at the time. He had a fractured sternum, but now he has to go and have some surgery next week for his shoulder. There's something, I don't understand all the medical words, but there's something in his rotator cuff. But I then have just they mentioned after I got out of hospital, because I was in hospital for 2 weeks, and I don't really remember the first week. I was on, I mean, I can't even imagine the amount of pain medication, but it was just, maybe in shock. I don't sort of know, and it was just so unreal that it's like nothing I've ever been involved in ever in my life. So there was sort of that, and then by the time we actually made it home, we found out that my knee was completely screwed. So I literally just a couple of weeks ago had a full knee reconstruction, which is the most painful thing to go. Like, I thought, your broken rib, haha. Let's talk about your knee. And there's so many CL things in your knee, which are all torn to pieces. So I'm just dealing with that now. I go to rehab and physiotherapy sort of pretty often. They've actually put a hospital bed in our spare room, which is where I live right now, which is quite odd, to be honest with you. I mean, amazing, because there's this whole thing out there called the CTP, those annoying green slips that you pay. The money for that goes into a thing called CTP, which has looked after us quite phenomenally. So through that, we've got, I'm living in my spare bedroom in a hospital bed, which goodness, it's
You've been going through some serious rehab since then. What's this period of time been like for you?
It's look, it's changed me, Anthony. I think very differently. There's a lot of things that I would probably get worked up about in the past that simply don't matter anymore. And it's kind of interesting because I know that we're very, very lucky. I know the three of us are hugely lucky to have our lives, to be alive is a thing. But it's a really interesting headspace to feel that I'm lucky, but yet I'm going through the fucking worst thing in the world at the same time. Is quite conflicting and it's challenging. So it's kind of playing with my head a little bit, and I can't get out. I can't work, which is so. We sort of sat at home for 5 months waiting to get back to work, and I simply can't, and so it's quite hard at the moment. There's it's the two hands. I'm very lucky, but I'm also having a fucking shit time. Excuse my language. So it's just, yeah, the last few weeks have been quite hard, and we're still sort of dead smack in the middle of it, unfortunately. So we've got some weeks ahead of rehabilitation, and my husband goes in for surgery next week, so now I get to look after him, but I can't really because I can't move. So yeah, geez, it's really been real.
You've won many awards as a sommelier and you're one of our most influential. How are you feeling about your career at the moment, given what you're going through right now?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, because that was one of my greatest fears with the injuries to my face, was that I would lose my sense of taste and smell, because it came so close to my nose, and there's such tiny little veins, and just that the idea of that was quite hard. So for the first sort of few weeks, once I'd actually made it home, I didn't actually have a glass of wine because I didn't. I was if I couldn't smell it, I don't know how I would have dealt with that whole emotion, but I can. So I can. So my job is still there, and where the awards I've been so lucky. Every list that I've written has won a major award, and with being at Icebergs, the real plan, and I think one of the reasons that James sort of hired me was to bring this sort of wine culture to a venue such as Bergs, because before that, you could have the greatest Aperol spritz you've ever had in your entire life, but to sit down and really have something serious, have a good glass of wine, was perhaps not as much of a focus. And so the 2 years that I've been there, we've been really working on building this side of the beverage program, and making this wine list that A, I'm really proud of, and B, suits our guests and our clientele. And because I'm such a believer that the wine list must suit the venue. It needs to be something that works within those four walls, not just suit the sommelier who's writing it, or the restaurant manager it's not about us, it's about the guest. And so I really feel that I put together one of the greatest lists of my life. I was so proud of it, and thank God, thank God we were able to enter that particular list for the Wine List of the Year awards before this all happened, and which was really fantastic, but also meant that we were really stocked up. So so when we got to reopen again, the purchasing of, because financially, obviously everyone understands, the margins in restaurants are so small. So to have to reopen and then to even think about purchasing wine, it's just goodness. But thank goodness we didn't have to really worry about that, because I'd set it up for this ginormous wine list literally just before we closed. So that's it's something really great. I think.
Most people, when they dine, they kind of rely on someone of your talents to sort of guide them through a wine list. But what makes a great sommelier?
I think compassion, and also taking, I think, empathy, and not, I think ego, in my opinion, is what ruins most sommeliers, because they think too much about themselves and what they want to drink, or what price point they want to sell, rather than what that actual guest wants to drink. I love natural wine. I've been an advocate since the start of my whole career, but there are a lot of guests that come to Icebergs that just do not want to drink like that. They absolutely don't, and there is no point even, to sell them something that is a little bit funky and maybe a little bit cloudy is just going it's going to really derail their experience. So you have to give the guests what they want and work out what is going to be the greatest wine for them, and that's what it's all about. To be a som, it's so easy to get caught up in your own head, but it's for us, it's them. You've got to give them what they want to drink, which is not always, I think, everyone's cup of tea, unfortunately.
What drew you to the hospitality industry?
Yeah, it was. I studied fashion. I was going to be a fashion designer. That was my thing.
Wow.
And I know, so random. And I can't draw, so I don't know why I ever thought that would be a thing. Anyway, I just, I had it in because this was back in Sydney when Sydney was a, we would go to Tatler and we would go to, Will and Toby's, and I would hang out with these wonderful fashionista people. And I thought, yep, that's it. That's what I want to do. And I always worked in hospitality as a sort of a sideline, to make good money. And it is good money. Back when tips were tips, it was quite phenomenal. So it was always this kind of side game. And I ended up hating fashion. I ended up hating sitting in a room on my own sewing sample pieces. It was just not me in any way, shape or form. And I was actually, funnily enough, working for Morris at North Bondi Italian Food, Morris and Rachel at North Bondi Italian Food, and I had I know, I've come complete full circle. But I had a night out with a gentleman called Mark Ward. And we had a belter of an evening together, and he actually owns Regal Rogue now, Vermouth, and he throughout the night he kept saying, "Oh, Gab, I've got the perfect job for you. Gab, I've got the perfect job for you." And so I called him the next day, or a day or so after the hangover subsided, and it was like, what is this job? Like, what is this great job? And it turned out the job was assistant sommelier at Astral Restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And remember Astral? Remember when that was it was a $1,000 degustation that I got ripped to pieces in the media about. But anyway, that's another story. So I went, and I knew a little bit about wine. I could get myself through my section of an evening knowing enough about wine, but I didn't know anything, And so I went to this interview and absolutely lied throughout the whole interview, and lied throughout my trial shift, and read the back of bottles. And Peter Bell completely saw straight through me, but he taught me, and it was a bottle of Bass Phillip Gamay, funnily enough, was the wine that really changed my world, because I tasted like oyster shells. And I remember going to Pete going, "What the hell is this? Like, why does this red wine taste like an oyster? I don't get it. How does this happen?" And it just blew my mind. And then I was completely and utterly hooked. That was it. I was in. And, working in that place, there was not really a huge budget you didn't have this sort of cogs issue that I sort of work with now. So the list was amazing, and you could sell bottles of wine to people that had so much money. And so to taste some of the wines that I would sell throughout the night would just be, oh my goodness, I don't really have the words for how exceptional that was. So I was hooked after that, completely hooked. And then I think I sort of moved to a few other little restaurants, and then after that, it was really Bloodwood that just made, it just made me a complete lifer for this industry, because working with Claire Van Buren and Mitch then was, they'd only just opened the venue, and they gave me full license. They were like, you do what you do, Gab, off you go. And the support from that, which was phenomenal at the time, because there are such leaders in the Newtown scene. We were literally the first. It was every kind of cheap Thai that you could imagine, but there was nowhere else that you could go and get a good glass of wine or a good cocktail and have great music and eat this delicious food. Like, they were some of the greatest chefs I've ever worked with. And so that really cemented for me like this is it, it's what we're going to do. And then that list there, we won sort of best small list on a number of occasions for the work that we sort of did, the work I did. I don't know, it was yeah, really excellent. Yeah, everyone should go to Bloodwood. It's such a good venue if you're out there.
A great somm has the ability to take food and wine and make it greater than the sum of its parts. Do you have any sort of really memorable wine and food experiences that have changed you?
Yeah, I think the biggest one would have to be when Noma came to Australia, because Mads, this was when I was at Love Tilly, and a lot of the team from Noma would come and hang out at Love Tilly. It was great, and Mads and I became quite good friends, really quite good friends. We both have a very similar sense of humour, and can be we love to sort of have a good bitch about guests at the end of the night, and so he managed to get us, myself and Ari, a spot for lunch when the whole thing was completely sold out. And when we went and sat down, he looked at me and he's like, "I'm not showing you any bottles, Gab. You're not going to see a single bottle. We're just going to pour you wine." And that was when he said that, I was like, "Oh, I want to know what they are." But taking that thing out and just doing the simple food and wine match was really really extraordinary. That really sort of cemented it. It doesn't have to be the most excellent producer for it to be on a tasting menu. It doesn't you associate a label with greatness. It's what the juice inside is what really sort of matters. And I think, and then, another thing, I was talking to Ari earlier, and one thing that this time of the year, one thing I really miss is rootstock. At this time of the year, normally I would be so stressed out trying to put together this massive wine festival, but that was just such a incredibly important thing for not only sort of not the food and wine match, but for bringing our community together and for making Australia a global wine country, and tasting and just seeing, and what Giorgio would do with the Indigenous community, and Mike and James, everyone was really, I think, very important for me throughout the 5 years that it happened. It was huge. We had so much fun, and that would I miss that at this time of year, because even though we would be really busy with work, it was always something that we just did for nothing. Some of the volunteers that came worked every single year with me for absolutely nothing, and worked their absolute asses off just for the love of wine, and that's cemented in my heart for what this sort of wine or beverage or whatever side of the hospitality industry is there is an absolute true love for it that I think can get that. Yeah, it just makes me a bit teary even thinking about, so.
Well, rootstock really changed the conversation about wine in this country. What do you love about the wine that's being produced in this country at the moment? It's a young country, but it's very diverse.
It's so exciting, and I look back. So one of the most important people for me within my wine career was Sam Hughes, and Sam Hughes was a mentor and a friend, and he really played such an important part in changing wine in Australia. And it's not all necessarily about natural wine, but for him it was about knowing where it comes from and knowing how it's farmed, and the start of what the natural selection theory did, which is Tom Shabrook and James Erskine and Anton von Klopper and Sam Hughes. What they did was really awaken. They really shook this country up, and everyone woke up and went, "Hang on a second, I don't have to drink a Shiraz that's 15% alcohol and tannic and gross. I can drink something that's 12% alcohol from a little tiny place called the Basket Ranges that I don't know where it is, but it's delicious and natural, And so I think that the wine that's being produced in this country now is it's up there with the rest of the world, and I think leading in the rest of the world. Where for a long time, and I remember, I'm old enough now to remember what it was like before, and it was, not to be stereotypical, but buttery Chardonnay and big Shiraz was really what you would get from Australia. That's what was made. Whereas now there is varietals that work here better than they work in Portugal, and there's people that are really experimenting about what works in this country, and and making wines that they, the boutique producer is kind of king now, which is is so important and also very exciting. If you're a young person that wants to be a winemaker, you can do that. You lease a little part of a cellar and make some, these things are popular, possible. And there's also sommeliers out there like myself and the whole team that are really willing to sit and taste with you and see if it works. And if it works, then goodness gracious, put it on the wine list. And that's, I think I'm excited by the wine in this country, and I'm excited to see what happens over the next few years, because obviously, the bushfires and the climate problems that we have in Australia and the world are really going to play a little bit of a part in what happens with certain varietals in certain regions. And so I'm excited to see where it all goes. I think we're on a journey, and it's going to be quite interesting, I think.
You still have quite a long road left with your rehabilitation, but there'll come a time when you're back at Icebergs. What's it going to feel like when you're back in your role there?
Oh my God, I can't wait. It's going to be great. It's going to be really, really great. And I think just to be back with the team, and Lillian McCabe, who was the assistant when she started, she's now the sommelier, which is really good job, Lil. To get back and work with her again is going to be really quite exceptional, because she's got a palate like no one I've ever met. It's really quite phenomenal, that sort of chef. When chefs move into wine, they can really exceed people. So being back, it's going to be good. It's going to be great. I think it's going to be quite hard, because it is a hard venue. It's a beast of a venue. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's big and it's busy and it's up and down stairs, and it's it's great. But it's going to be I can't wait, Anthony. It's going to be really awesome. I can't wait.
Well, Gabrielle, you've had a hell of a year, and I know things are still pretty tough, but your enthusiasm and energy and spirit is bloody inspirational.
Oh,
And
thanks.
And we're absolutely honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
I will. I will. And look, truly, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honoured. It's nice to have a chat, and please also keep in touch. I'll put on my brand new social media when I'm back on the floor at Icebergs, and everyone can come and drink some wine with me, because God, it's going to be a party that first week back. It's going to be wonderful, and you're all welcome and invited.
Well, how can we say no to that? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.